my name is Lauri Palsa. I work in the as a postdoctoral researcher in the University of Jyväskylä in the Department of Education and Teacher Education, especially. Today, I'm focusing on our current research project, which we are conducting together with Pekka Mertala. It's called Running with Data. So basically, we study multiliteracies and different kind of literacies people have in this kind of non-formal setting. So what we have done is that we have asked from the Finnish recreational adults runners about their use of different technologies that they are integrating in as part of their activities and practices and hobbies involved in running. In this presentation, this is still an research project which is still in progress and ongoing. So rather than focusing on some final results, I consider this more like maybe a trailer or a bit of a teaser about this kind of the whole research project, and to give you some insights about what kind of questions that we are trying to solve and we are tackling right now. And I'm using the concept of literacy as this kind of red line between these different perspectives which we have to our data and in this research project. I refer to this concept of datascape as a metaphor or this kind of a combination of two words, which basically is the data and also the landscapes, so to illustrate this kind of broadness of data that we have in today's societies and cultures and in our daily lives, and what kind of literacies and literacy practices we might have in relation to those data and in these datascapes. So let's start forward by discussing some backgrounds. What kind of approaches do we have in this research process, in this research project? So I think this kind of main concept that we might have is, or this approach is related to the question about literacy and the concept of literacy in itself in specific contexts. So we focus on literacy in today's this kind of non-formal datascapes, but we all understand that the concept of literacy, it's not only about involving reading and writing this kind of traditional written text, but the concept of literacy is always related to the age and different times it is used. For example, what we understand literacy now in today's world, it can be quite different than it used to be, for example, 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or even 100 years ago. So the literacy is always contextualized in different times and also in different locations. For example, in today's Finland, I think the literacy can be discussed in different terms, for example, compared to other European countries, or in a global setting in different parts of the world, or within one country itself. So because it's very contextual. But these kind of recent developments have led to a situation that the concept has diversified in a sense. It has been splintered in a sense that we have a multiply different literacies, including digital literacies, information literacies, media literacies, and so forth. And also there are this kind of a more comprehensive umbrella literacy conceptualizations called multiliteracy, meta-literacy, and transliteracies as well. And these kind of recent trends, developments, for example, in relation to media and technology development, called, for example, deepening mediatization or media convergence, it also highlights the importance to understand this kind of relations between these concepts and different kind of literacy conceptualizations that we have. In this research project, we focus mainly on data literacy. But when we think about the meaning of data literacy in different contexts, we think that in this kind of understanding literacy and literacy practices in non-formal setting, it allows us to gain more understanding in relation to formal education as well, and these kind of different formal areas in life that we have. And I think those insights and understandings can be used to broaden the understanding, so we have understanding about the formal context, and also the non-formal context, but the non-formal understandings and insights that we have, we can use them to support the understanding also in the formal setting as well. So the data we have noticed, and the research has noticed, that it has different meanings and importances in different areas in the society and culture, and it has sparked this kind of a discussion about the competences that people need to be able to use and utilize and to take into account the challenges presented by the data. And this discussion has led for multiple different definitions of the same concept. So even though we talk about data literacy, the data literacy itself can mean various different things. For example, focusing on personal data, data infrastructures, or even data science, or when we approach it from certain perspectives, such as critical data literacy and so forth. And we have noticed that the data literacy, it's one of these kind of a buzzwords in today's this kind of mediated society, but it has been discussed mainly in terms of formal education, for example, in different curriculums or in different curricula, or illustrating different competences that students are taught to need in today's society, or in some particular professional setting. For example, there are a lot of research focusing on data literacy, for example, for teachers, what kind of data literacy practices teachers might have, and data literacy competences, what kind of data literacies journalists should have, what kind of data literacies doctors, physicians, even safety professionals and business sector professionals need in today's society. And often these discussions led to this kind of very abstract level conceptualizations about what does this data literacy mean. They can be very, very formal, illustrating these kind of goals or demands or requirements that people might have, but they also can be quite instrumental in a sense that data literacy is a way to tackle some challenges or recognize some questions, and this is offered as solutions. But in this kind of my own background is on researching multiliteracy and in formal education setting, and in my dissertation I focused on this kind of conceptual contextualization of multiliteracy. So basically meaning that we should recognize the importance of the context and when we define and discuss about these kind of different literacy conceptualizations. So in this study, we focus on data literacy and data literacy practices in the context of Finnish runners and running community in the Finnish recreational running. So what makes this very interesting and prominent context for data literacy research is that running is it's very common form of exercise and sport, and part of many people's leisure time across the globe, but also within Finland. And also it's very inclusive sport in a sense that it's practiced almost throughout the lifespan of people, but it's still, even though it's very inclusive, it's still there are a lot of communalities within these communities. The running itself, it's something that brings these people together. And this kind of what is called post-sport running culture means that it's not only about the competitions in tracks or in some competitions in some running routes, which is basically this kind of modern traditional way of thinking about running. It's about competition or improving your fitness or health, but in today's society it's more than that. For some people it might be that, but there are a lot of different reasons why people are running, and running has different meanings for different people's lives, and it's very diverse approaches. For example, some can have talk about social running, so the social reasons are the mostly behind it, or it can even have this kind of spiritual or even religious approaches people have, or it can be a part of self-expression and so forth. So it's very interesting context for examining research, but also the data literacy, because the running is also very intensive sport or part of leisure time in terms of information. There's a lot of different information that can be acquired through different senses that people have, or the embodied knowledge that the runners have, which they have acquired during the years of running and with the sports. But the technology and the evolvement and developments and this kind of a commonness of technology during these recent decades has changed this kind of a landscape for runners quite a lot. And the runners are actually, they are even called these kind of power users of different kind of tracking technologies and to using data as part of their sports. Not everyone uses, and there are different ways of using it, but especially in this kind of a, like Finland, very highly digitalized society, it's very interesting to understand this kind of a change. What kind of a role the technologies have in this kind of a running environment, which is very embodied, very bodily intensive part of leisure time. And also what is interesting is that these kind of running technologies and wearable technologies, there's a very broad variance of different technologies, and people are using them. But most of maybe the runners, if, for example, runners who are like 70, or so the technologies and data, it has not been part of their like formal curricula in their formal education, but they have acquired different kind of competences by using these technologies without this kind of formal curricula behind these competences. So it's really interesting to see what kind of data literacies people have acquired during this using these technologies, and what kind of insights that might have, so we can understand the data literacies in different contexts. So that's basically the idea of researching data literacies and as part of multiliteracies in a running community as a form of non-formal leisure time of people. In our research, the question about the practice in terms of practice is that we collected through open web survey a collection of answers from over 1,000 Finnish recreational runners, from adult runners, with the most of this open web survey. It very overly exceeded all our expectations about the amount of data that we could acquire during with this research method. So we have a really broad, very diverse set of answers and data that we are currently analyzing. It's a mostly qualitative data, so there are open questions that we asked, and people were really interested by describing their thoughts to us during this web survey. So we are currently focusing on 4 different themes in this data set, which I'm going to briefly go through in the next slides, and I'm going to focus on these separate perspectives by illustrating, by highlighting one of those data excerpts that we have had throughout the survey. So the first one that we are focusing on is the technologies that people are using, the runners are using as part of the leisure time. So we are focusing on what can be called maybe the datascapes of runners. So we asked about what kind of technologies they use and for what purposes. So, for example, this runner explains that they are using Vantage V2 sports watch and Polar Flow for training and progress monitoring. During training, I monitor heart rate and try to perform exercises within certain heart rate limits or with a controlled variation in heart rate levels. Out of interest, I track monthly and yearly mileage and climbing mileage. I think the data will give an interesting overview of my progress, although I run mainly on a gut feeling. I also monitor my ANS status and use sleep tracking. So I think this, even though it's very short description about the technologies the runner uses, it's quite illustrative in a sense that when we take into account this kind of 1,000 responses and the data, we have the opportunity to understand this very broad and very diverse set of technologies people are using in this kind of a comprehensive way, but it's also very individual. So people are using different devices, different platforms, different softwares for different purposes. For example, this runner, it illustrates the media convergence in a sense that it uses the sports watch, but in addition, to using the specific device, it also needs to use the platform to analyze the data, which is called the Polar Flow, either the mobile application or the online software. The runner uses the heart rate data for training while running. So when we consider the relationship between running and using the different technologies, we can understand that different technologies and different data are used in different relation to running. It was during the actual running that the runner uses the heart rate data, but also the runner uses the longer, this kind of cumulative data to understand the longer progress for the training, for example, the mileage of the training and the overall elevation of the of running. But also, besides this kind of longer data for overall progress, the runner also uses the data outside running to track, for example, the sleep. But also what is interesting here is that the runner also prioritize the embodied knowledge that they have. For example, even though they use a variety of different kind of technological information, the runner explains to run mainly on a gut feeling. So even though a lot of different kind of information is used, the embodied knowledge and the embodied sensors are prioritized before the technological information. So that's one this kind of like insights of the data that we are analyzing at the moment about the used technologies that we have. Besides understanding the use of technologies, we also asked about, there were a question about if you use the technology or if you don't use the technologies, and if you don't, then the runner could explain the reasons behind this decision. And almost 50 respondents, the runners explained to not using technologies while running. So it was really interesting to also have this kind of additional perspective to technological use. Because, for example, here, the runner explains that I'm not that kind of a tracker person. Plus, relaxing, resetting your mind and enjoying nature is not compatible with staring at the monitor. Before my first marathon, I bought a heart rate monitor and stared at it, so I knew how to train at the right heart rate. Then I got to know myself and my heart rate, and I no longer need a heart rate monitor. 10 marathons now. So the runner is very experienced runner behind. They have 10 marathons behind them. So this kind of data excerpt illustrates how aware people are about the technologies and the use of technology. So basically, the runner uses this kind of identification about I'm not that kind of a tracker person. So they understands and are aware that there are a lot of people who are using this kind of technologies, but they are not using them at the moment. So the technological non-use and use is not like binary concept. They're not like separate categories, but they can be quite non-binary. For example, this non-user has used the technology before and used the technology and the information to acquire knowledge about their body that can be used out, even though they are not using the technologies at the moment. So it's almost like this kind of a calibration about the bodily knowledge in relation to technological information. So it's quite complex situation in quite interesting and complex relationship that people can have in relation to the technologies they are using. The third approach that we have for this data is focus mainly on the data literacies and data literacy activities and actions people have in relation to the data they are using and what kind of methods they have, what kind of practices they have when they are assessing the credibility of the data. For example, here the runner explains that they trust the Garmin heart rate monitor quite a lot because it correlates well with the feel and the curves look reasonable. My previous Suunto had major problems with the heart rate measurement, so I couldn't trust this data. I also trust the distance and speed measurements because my watch shows mostly accurate results for the standard roads. I don't use fitness tests and assessments because they are often unreliable. So here there are several degrees of trust. Some of those measurements are trusted and some are not. So this kind of data literacy practices is a very diverse. For example, here the trust is this kind of credibility trust assessment is based on comparison between the technological information with the embodied field, and the embodied field is prioritized because it is used as a way to assess the information and prioritize the embodied knowledge. But also the data is compared with the standard routes because the runner knows the length of those roads, so they can assess the information based on this comparison. But also this data excerpt illustrates how this kind of concrete variables maybe are more trusted than more calculative. For example, the fitness tests and fitness assessments, which are based on some algorithms or some other ways how they are calculated. And also here the consequences about not trusting some measurement is that they don't use that kind of information. And the fourth, just a quickly overview, is a question about these kind of epistemic authorities that technological information can have in relation to runners. So the information, it's not only about a question about if you trust the data or if you don't trust, but there are several levels of trust and different kind of positions the technological information can get from the perspective of runners about the credibility of the information, but also what kind of meanings and what kind of consequences the information might have based on the level of credibility the runners give for the different information sources, even it's embodied knowledge or based on their bodies or and other senses, or the technology, different kind of sources the technology might have. So besides this more theoretical understanding, I think we throughout this study it offers us a lot of different kind of opportunities for implications as well. Especially from a theoretical perspective, I think this kind of interdisciplinarity is one of the strengths of the resource. So we are focusing on mainly on the from the perspective of education and literacy, but also by integrating the perspective of disciplines of sports or disciplines of technological studies. This offers us a way to understand more conceptual insights and understanding, and especially by highlighting the contextuality of literacy conceptualization, in this case, in relation to data literacy. But besides this theoretical discussion, I think there are a lot of different kind of stakeholders that can be identified that might see the results to be useful. For example, the education developers and planners, teacher education, for example, in terms of the understanding about the learning goals of data literacy and also the transversality of the data literacy, and also the technological industry, for example, to develop the technologies, and also the sports and movement professionals. When considering, for example, the use and non-use of data and different technologies. And in more practical terms, I think runners themselves can find these results useful, and also the various professionals, such as educators or coaches and instructors, so they can reflect and improve their practices. So thank you very much. And you have the opportunity to follow our research, for example, in social media by using the hashtag runningwithdata, or in our websites, runningwithdata.fi, or we have even our own YouTube channel, Running with Data, where we are collecting different kind of videos and webinars that we are conducting during this process. So thank you very much. I'll stop screen sharing here.